November 29th, and we are really grateful to our hardworking employees for their decision to return. We know that they share our commitment to doing what's best for kids and students' well-being, and we do look forward to continuing to serve our students together. I also just want to be sure that we thank our school-based employees, our school nutrition staff who helped cover, parents, central office staff who pitched in, university partners, community members who volunteered to make sure that students didn't go hungry during the work stoppage. I think that's important to say out loud, but I also think we have to thank those who brought awareness to the issue, who raised their voice and level of concern and shared those with those. I think there's no question that we know for far too long that public education has been underfunded and public school employees have not received fair pay. And so I think it's important to say that we wish we could change all of that overnight, and we can't. But what we do have to do is to do what we can do. And when I met with school nutrition leaders yesterday to discuss their concerns, I was really clear and really honest with them and said that we would do everything that we could, but it's going to take all of us to be civically involved and united to advocate for fair pay at different levels of government. And so we talked about that yesterday. We also shared with the public our plan for the 4% rate increase for the school nutrition assistants and the 7% rate increase for our school nutrition managers. In addition to that, school nutrition managers can receive the quarterly bonus by increasing the number of students who are participating in the school nutrition program. That is separate and in addition to the rate increase, which I think is also important for people to understand. Moving forward, we will launch an advisory council for school nutrition employees so that we can have honest and proactive discussions on ways to improve a few things: our services to students, creating a positive working environment, and figuring out how we can continue to advocate for fair compensation. We do have a long road ahead. North Carolina continues to celebrate being the #1 state in the country for business, but we can't do that and at the same time be the last for public education and how we compensate our employees. So we must fully fund public education, and that includes fair pay for our school nutrition staff and our frontline workers. And I'm confident that as we work together, we'll be able to do that moving forward. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Dr. Oakley, you mentioned an advisory council, the creation of an advisory council. Can you elaborate a bit more on that, how exactly that's going to come about, and who exactly will be appointed to that?
Yeah. So, we do this in other ways. We have student advisory council where we have kids from each high school who come and talk about, problems and solutions. We do it with teachers. We have one for parents. And so it's just a good way to have voices at the table. So this will be a cross-section of both assistants and managers that are representative of our county as a whole. People in different levels of school, different sizes of school face different circumstances, and I think what we learned is we need to make sure that we have their voices at the table in an ongoing way, and so this is an effort in that direction.
Hey, Dr. Oakley, Cassie Famber, Fox 8 News. Wanted to ask you about the dynamic of those conversations that you had with these nutrition employees. How have those conversations evolved yesterday into today and reached this satisfactory sort of conclusion for right now?
I think being honest is really important, and I think that everyone deserves fair compensation, and I think us saying from the very get-go, this is what we can do. It wasn't like a back and forth game. It was being very honest about what we could do. People appreciated that. They're still frustrated, as lots of different types of workers are, and so I think the communication, the advocacy has to be the path forward. I do feel like they feel like it's a new starting point, though, and that they've been heard, and they were appreciative of that.
In terms of this advisory council, what is the timeline for creation of that? And like you said, do you have any idea of like the number of people or how often the council will meet?
We're in the process now of planning it. Typically, those groups get together quarterly. Their peers typically choose who serves, and we make sure that we have voices from across the county at different types of schools. So our goal is to have those plans figured out and a date issued by the end of January, so that we're able to set those dates and have those ongoing conversations moving forward. But I think the door is open now. We just met with people in person. We spent the whole time listening to them, and so I think we're in a good place to have that path forward of open dialogue back and forth. But we also have this understanding that we can only do what we can do with the resources that we have, and so I think getting everybody on the same page was a good next step. But we have to continue to be at the table together.
I mentioned and asked this yesterday, but I think some of the employees are still wanting the re-implementation of like a step pay program. And I know that you said that with this recent budget cycle that's something that you guys may talk about. Is there a reason why it was taken away for the cafeteria workers?
So when the state raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour, that's when that pay structure was not sustainable. So there were people making $12 an hour, then the minimum was raised. That creates that compression, if you think about it in terms of how much people make in years of experience. But we have gone back and figured out how to do that in other areas. This is different because of the fact that it's the enterprise fund. It's not a state or locally funded source, and so we are committed to having the conversation and figuring out how we do that, but it's going to have to be different than what we can do for our bus drivers or our plumbers or our grounds crews, just because of how school nutrition is funded. But we did tell them in writing, and that tonight and yesterday, that we hear them, that step is a concern. I was able to meet with some new school nutrition employees today to thank them, and was able to meet a person who had 23 years of experience and a person who had 2 weeks of experience, and they do get the same paycheck, and that doesn't feel fair, and no matter what your job is or what industry you're in. So we are committed to having the conversation. I also think we have to understand how the funding stream works, and that's a reality, and we shared that with them. We also shared that with the county.
So yesterday, there were some creative things. Summerfield Elementary partnered with Domino's. I covered a story at Oakview where their cafeteria workers weren't some of those that stepped out necessarily, but their PTO came and gave their whole cafeteria staff gift cards. Have you just been impressed by how people sort of gathered together and figured out what they needed to do? I just wanted to give you a chance to really talk about how that happened.
I mean, it's why we're doing the work here. I think that there's just a feeling here, as big of a school system as this is, every time we need help, our community steps up. And it's not just parents, and it's not just PTOs, it's everybody. It's faith partners, it's across the board. When we had to deploy laptops, it felt similar. You know, it was kind of reminiscent of that to me. I was grateful, I was not surprised, and I think it's why we keep coming back to do what we do.
Dr. Oakley, a number that some of the cafeteria workers have been throwing out as something that they want to see is $16.50. That's the minimum that they want to be paid. Is there any way that the school system could possibly work towards that goal? You know, not in the immediate future, but in the near one?
So I think we talked a little bit about this, like we're all chasing a market. So when we're in this time where the unemployment rate is so low, it is a moving target. Drivers that drive for distribution companies are making more and more. We're chasing a market here that's no different for our school nutrition employees. So we don't know until budgets pass what's a feasible goal or not. But next year, $16.50 might not be enough. You know what I mean? Like, as we think about inflation and time and position changes and competition in the labor market, I think it would be short-sighted to say, oh, this would be enough. But I also don't think we could say, yes, that seems feasible, because we're not in control of our state budget and how we're funded. Again, the importance of advocating at different levels of government.
Dr. Oakley, yesterday you mentioned how the strike kind of impacted not only the giving out the meals, but also the class time as a result as well. Did things kind of run more smoothly today, and was there also that effect again on the class time?
I think our teachers and principals would say, particularly at the schools that had more staff return, that it felt like a more normal school day. I don't think people realize the complexities that go into, so I mean, many of our elementary schools start serving lunch at 10:20 and go every 25 minutes getting kids in and out, sometimes on 2 different lines. And when, you know, when that gets backed up, so does math. So does recess, so does who's standing in line for a bathroom. I mean, I really do think it's a domino effect, and I do think today felt more normal. But I think, you know, we were still dealing with several schools that had a different kind of a lunch period, and that impacts instruction, it impacts morale, and it impacts what kids are used to.
In terms of funding, we've already talked about how the state doesn't provide this funding for nutrition workers. What's the conversation been looking like with you between county leaders or county commission, and where else are you guys potentially looking for funding for these raises or any future raises for nutrition workers?
Yeah, so it works on a reimbursement level. So the more meals we serve, the better the funding stream is. And I don't think anybody's absent from the conversation. So we've had a good partnership with the county. They understand the concerns that we're facing. They're also facing different budget struggles, I think, and in this coming year, they've shared that with us. The pot can only go so far. And so I think it's not a one-size approach. I think we have to do this federally. I think we have to do it at the state level and the local level, and I think it has to be a consistent message. But it also has to be one that takes into account all the workers that we have. We also want to be fair. And different types of positions have different pay scales, and so this is certainly part of the conversation. We let people know that this will continue to be part of our budget planning, and that's where we are right now.
One more question. How many workers showed up to the town hall, would you approximate?
That is really hard to say. I don't know. Do you have a guess?
Probably
Between 60 and 100. That feels right. Yeah, I mean, there was a good crowd, and they were willing to share both sides of things, and so I think that was certainly time well spent, but it's also why it needs to be an ongoing conversation.
Dr. Oakley, many of the cafeteria workers that I at least spoke to today had mentioned, you know, their frustration, obviously, but a recurring idea that came up was that many of them feel like an afterthought when it comes to discussions about budget and pay. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think any time we're communicating about the budget, it's complicated, it's complex, and we talk about state and local and federal, and this coming year is going to be even more difficult because of the sunset of the federal relief dollars from COVID. And so I think what it helped us understand is that the more we can go out, the more we can have these advisory councils and have the conversations about what we can and cannot do is important. We, unfortunately, as a school district, can't change the way that the USDA oversees school nutrition programming, how meals are reimbursed, but I think the more information people have and the more of a space there is to ask questions, the better off we'll be moving forward.
Thank you. Additionally, many of the workers say that they kind of want a seat at the table when it comes to budget discussions. I'm not 100% sure how that works. And is it possible at all for your employees to sort of weigh in, at least offer some level of input? And if so, what kind of vehicles do they have access to give that?
Yeah, so that's exactly what advisory councils do. So as we're building the budget, we share that, we take questions, we get input. With some of our Title I federal funding, there's surveys that go out to gather input. So there is a place and for them to have a seat at the table, and we're hopeful that we're making steps in that direction.
And Dr. Oakley, my last question was, as far as a timetable goes to when we could start those budget discussions for next year, I know you said it's almost already time, and it feels like we just got done with this last fiscal year. How soon can they expect those discussions to happen?
Well, we've already had our first meeting with the county. It just happens really fast, and we're up against mandated timelines, so it's not really a choice. We have to start them now, but the more information people have ahead of time, the better off we are when it comes down to it. So we had another discussion this morning with the county, and we'll continue to have those conversations January, February, till the approval deadline, May 15th, and then the vote. And then, of course, we typically have our local way before we've had a state budget, and then we have to go back and see what we can actually pull off. And historically, that's been well after the school year started.
No one else? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for doing it, yeah. Thank you, guys.
He needs B-roll, man. I will take one for you.
Oh, I appreciate your help. Also, you ask questions in your voice.
Did I really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh, 100%. That's a level of theater I just can't.
The southern accent just goes away.